The transformation of the Virgin Mary. How a Jewish girl from Nazareth became a Christian icon. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, provide skimpy biographies of Jesus with huge time gaps. We meet Jesus in brief citations as a newborn, a 6-year-old in Egypt about to return to Nazareth, a 12-year-old at the temple in Jerusalem, and then at age 30 when his spiritual mission begins as he is baptized by John the Baptist in the River Jordan. Not much fodder here for a reliable psychological profile. The controversial 2nd century infancy Gospel of Thomas, one of those alternative Gospels, offers some additional details about Jesus up to age 12. But the purported supernatural powers of the child Jesus fly in the face of the earlier canonical Gospels' depictions. As one commentator stated, the text, that is, the infancy Gospel, describes Jesus as a brilliant child performing a number of miracles in Nazareth, completely contradicting the portrayal of the Nazareans as described in Luke chapter 4. Luke describes the natives of Nazareth responding in shock to Jesus' initial messianic teaching, seemingly unfamiliar that Jesus was anything more than a poor carpenter's son. The New Testament tells us even less about Jesus' mother Mary. We first meet teenage Mary when she is visited by the angel Gabriel and told that she will conceive and bear a child by the power of the Holy Ghost. That's in Luke 1:26-35. And Matthew 1:18-25. Despite Mary's pregnancy, Joseph, a Jewish carpenter to whom she is betrothed, accepts her. Next, Mary visits her cousin Elizabeth, who is pregnant in her old age, in answer to the prayers of her pious husband Zacharias, a priest in the Jerusalem temple. Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem, where Jesus is then born. In the Gospel of Matthew's account, Mary, Joseph, and the infant, Jesus, escaped to Egypt to evade King Herod's decree to kill all male children in Bethlehem 2 years of age and younger. That is, when Herod hears that the Messiah has been born. 6 years later, they return to Nazareth. In a brief mention, we learn that Mary, Joseph, and the family traveled to Jerusalem each year to celebrate Passover. That's in Luke 2:41. On one return trip after Passover, when Jesus was 12, Mary and Joseph noticed that he was missing. They turned back to Jerusalem and found Jesus in the temple debating rabbis on the Torah. In another mention, Mary and the family think Jesus is mad when he is giving a sermon in Nazareth, and that's in Mark 3:20-21. The Gospel of John tells us that Jesus and Mary attended a wedding in Cana, where Jesus performed his first miracle, turning water into wine. That's John 1-3. We next encounter Mary as one of the witnesses to the crucifixion, and that appears in all 4 of the Gospels. While it's not explicit in the Gospels, Mary, mother of Jesus, may have been one of the Marys, or what are called, quote, other women, at Jesus' empty tomb, and that's in Luke 24:10. If so, that would have been her final appearance in the Gospels. At the beginning of Acts of the Apostles, the New Testament book that follows the Gospels, there is a brief mention of Mary attending a prayer session in Jerusalem with the disciples after the crucifixion. That's in Acts 1:12-14. Then Mary totally disappears from the story. The controversial, non-canonical, secret infancy Gospel of James, dated to the mid-2nd century, purports to fill in some details of Mary's birth and early life. However, these additions have been contested for inconsistencies and practices that are at odds with Judaism, and with Mary's later life in a rural community of working-class tradespeople. Even so, the infancy Gospel report of Mary's birth to her elderly parents Anna and Joachim, and Mary's life growing up in the temple in Jerusalem, still do not provide an informative biographical profile that illuminates who she was as a person. Despite the paucity of information about Mary, she has emerged as a towering figure in Christianity. She has inspired countless books about her life. Amazon lists over 41,000 volumes, and these are only the more contemporary ones. And then there are devotional books about Mary that abound. But who was Mary? What was she like in her daily life? What were her beliefs and personal qualities? We can speculate, as many have, but known biblical sources give us little information to go on. We could learn more about a casual acquaintance than we know about Mary by posing the simple question, "Tell me something about yourself." However, one aspect of Mary's life consistently stands out in the Gospels. She is a dedicated, practicing Jew. The few events documented about her are steeped in Judaism. Her pregnancy forecasts the coming of the Jewish Messiah. In accordance with the Torah mandate, Jesus is circumcised on the 8th day following his birth. Afterwards, Mary performs the postpartum temple purification rituals, also prescribed in the Torah. That appears in Luke 2:22. When Mary, Joseph, and Jesus return from exile in Egypt, we are told that she and the family traveled to Jerusalem every Passover, an arduous 7-day journey over rough terrain. How dedicated to your religion would you have to be to make that kind of journey for a religious celebration? The wedding in Cana that she attended with Jesus was obviously a Jewish wedding, attended only by Jews, because Jews of that era did not associate with non-Jews. That Mary took a special interest in this Jewish wedding is reflected in her concern that the wine was running out. In every activity we see Mary's Jewish signature. Given Mary's well-established Jewish identity, it is surprising that she is not portrayed as such in the trove of artworks of the medieval and Renaissance eras when Christian art flourished. Instead, she is depicted as a Christian, with no trace of Semitic features, dress, or surroundings. Mary's Jewish identity, which dominated her life, vanishes in these artworks, replaced by Northern European characteristics and backgrounds. I have written extensively about the omission of Jesus' connection to Judaism in artworks. The disconnection of Mary from her Jewish heritage is part of the same falsification of biblical history. Paintings of Mary's betrothal to Joseph provide glaring examples of this falsification of biblical history. The betrothal, some say marriage theme, was popular with the patrons who commissioned artworks, which explains why so many of them were produced by almost every major Renaissance artist. Typical are the paintings of the betrothal by Michael Patcher in 1495 and the great renowned painter Raphael in 1504. In both paintings, Mary and Joseph appear as stylish, fair-skinned, fair-haired Christians. To emphasize that these are Christian ceremonies, they are conducted by high church officials. But these ceremonies and settings are alien to the origins of this Jewish couple from a rural village in Nazareth, when in fact the actual betrothal and their lives had everything to do with Judaism. All indications from the gospel depiction say that Mary was immersed in Jewish life and practices. Other prominent paintings on the betrothal theme display the same falsifications of biblical history. Giotto, Pietro Perugino, El Greco, Giovanni di Pietro, Bernardino di Mariato, Jan van Doornik, Robert Campen, Sano di Pietro, Vittore Carpaccio, Philippe de Champagne, and more. Why should we care about these misrepresentations? A contentious and often violent relationship between Christianity and Judaism began in the first century as the emerging Christianity sought to establish itself separate from its deep roots in Judaism. Remnants of that divide continue to reverberate today. And art, particularly paintings and stained glass windows, was a major vehicle in medieval and Renaissance Europe for teaching the populace about church doctrines and perceptions, ones that often embodied anti-Semitism. But how could separation be achieved by fostering hate, demonization, and persecution of Jews if two of the most iconic figures in Christianity, Jesus and Mary, were dedicated practicing Jews, not the Christians devoid of Judaism as portrayed in art representations? In the early years of Christianity, separation was a bumpy road, since the new religion was tied to Jewish prophecy and lineage. That's why, after a unified church was established at the Council of Nicaea in 325 Common Era, the vilification of Jews and Judaism was stepped up, reinforced by a charge that became an unquestioned mantra, charging that Jews were Christ killers. Jews were then marginalized, persecuted, and frequently massacred. The Christianization of Jesus and Mary in artworks and other cultural depictions separated them from Judaism and thus widened the Christian-Jewish divide, enabling rampant anti-Semitism to infuse European societies through the Middle Ages and Renaissance periods. Further aiding the divide, the Church banned individual ownership or reading of the New Testament or translations of the Bible from Latin into native languages. That, though, was a kind of a moot point, since over 90% of the population was illiterate and couldn't read the Bible, which was in Latin, that virtually no one could read at that time. Thus, for over 1,000 years, the populace would never meet the Jewish Jesus and Mary of the Gospels. Artworks, perhaps somewhat inadvertently, contributed to virulent anti-Semitism by picturing Jesus and Mary as Northern European Christians with no connection to the dark, menacing, vile Jews as they were often represented. But today, we are in a new era of reconciliation led by Pope Francis. His bold pronouncement that, quote, "inside every Christian is a Jew," reaffirms the common foundation of Judaism and Christianity and seeks healing of ancient wounds and wrongs. I wish that art historians, curators, and art critics would follow Pope Francis's lead and finally acknowledge the falsification of biblical history in artworks that denied the Jewish identities of Jesus and Mary. In excruciatingly detailed commentaries on artworks by professionals in the art field, the glaring feature of identity theft is almost never noted. Doing so would take nothing away from the magnificence of these artworks and their contribution to the development and enhancement of art and culture. But it would contribute to a long overdue participation in the reconciliation of Christianity and Judaism. It would affirm the two sides of the Jesus and Mary story: Jesus and Mary, the dedicated Jews, and Jesus and Mary, whose lives inspired a new religion. Thanks for listening and watching. I'm Dr. Bernard Starr.